Hi, my name is Evan. I'm here with you at the RAND's Factory Aircraft Assembly Hall. We're here today to show you how to increase your S7's total fuel capacity. With this retrofit kit, we'll be removing your original 9-gallon tanks and installing RAND's newly designed 13-gallon tanks, putting your total fuel capacity at 26 gallons. So let's take a look at the kit. Here on the table I've laid out half of the retrofit kit. The other half of the kit has been installed in this S7 wing here behind me. In your kit you'll receive 2 13-gallon tanks, 2 compression tubes, 1 crossover vent, 2 vent line adapter tubes, clear sight tube, serrated edge wrap, X1011, 3/8 fuel line, 1/4-inch fuel line, filler cap assembly. And with this filler cap assembly, you can see that all the parts are designated with a RAND's part number, which also correspond to the RAND's parts drawings, RAND's figure drawings, and text pages. After that, we have grommets, an assortment of fittings, an assortment of hose clamps, hardware for our filler cap, an assortment of rivets, AAPQ41s, CCPQ44s, and AVEX. So let's get on to our first step. Before you remove the wings from your airplane, you want to be sure to drain all the fuel from your tanks. This can be done by removing the flush valve at the fuel tank or at the bottom of the fuselage. We'll need to disconnect our aileron control cables at each of the turnbuckles, here, 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 and here. After that, we'll remove our 3/8 fuel line from the hard line, here and here. We'll disconnect our strobe wires. Here we have these handy clips, and here. Pitot and static lines up here. We'll also need to disconnect the 1/4-inch fuel line at the forward end of our tank, here and here. We'll need to disconnect our crossover vent here and here. Then we'll move down to our flap mechanism and we'll disconnect our teleflex cable left and right, and we'll unroute it all the way back to our rear wing root. You'll need to remove your wing gap seals with screws at these locations on the bottom side of your wing. Any other screws or fasteners securing the cuff, windshield, skylight, or anything of that nature to the wing must be removed for proper separation of the wing. Okay, now with the help of 2 or ideally 3 people, we'll go ahead and remove one wing at a time. You'll need one person out here at the tip supporting it, while the other 2 people work on removing the bolts at the rear spar and the main spar, and at the lower strut attach point. From there, the wing can be sat on 2 horses with the horses in the location of the rib. After that, the struts and jury struts can later be removed completely from the wing structure itself. After the wing has been removed and placed on a sawhorse, the first thing you'll want to do is remove the wing closeouts. In this case, the closeouts have already been removed, but in your case, you'll need to drill with an 1/8-inch drill bit all of these AVEX rivets and remove the screws that secure this aft inspection plate. The next thing we'll do is remove our rib channel supports. To do this, we'll have to remove the 4 rivets on each clip. These rivets are buried under paint and fabric, so to locate these rivets and knock the mandrels out, a click punch is very handy. After we click punch and drill these rivets, we'll use a razor knife to to cut the fabric, being very careful, just around the edge of the rib clip, and then remove the rib clip. In this step, we've click punched our rivets, drilled them, and removed the scupper from around the original 9-gallon tank's filler neck. We'll need to remove the inspection plate just outboard of the tank cell area. This inspection plate will give us access to a 90-degree fitting that links the vent line off the top of the tank with the outboard vent line. We want to break that 90-degree fitting loose. Either end of the 90-degree fitting will work just fine. Next, we'll remove all the bolts securing our tank to the compression tube. To remove the inner and outer compression tubes, we'll need to cut open a hole in the bottom of the tank skin here next to our pre-existing inspection plate, and up here a hole next to our other pre-existing inspection plate. Now these holes should already be cut in the sheet metal, so all you should be cutting through is paint and fabric. These holes will allow us access to the bolts that secure the inboard and outboard compression tubes to the spars. Okay, after we've cut access holes at each of the compression tube bolt locations, we'll go ahead and remove all 4 bolts that secure both the inboard and outboard compression tubes. With the vent line disconnected from the 90-degree fitting on the outboard side of the tank, and all 4 of the compression tube bolts removed, the inboard compression tube can be removed, as well as the tank. Now that we have the tank removed, you can more clearly see the 90-degree angle fitting that secured the inboard vent line with the rest of the outboard vent line still remaining in the wing. The outboard vent line will be reused, this 90-degree angle fitting will be reused, and our compression tube here will be reused. Next, we need to remove all of this hardware and the mount brackets from the compression tubes. With a fly hole cutter, we'll need to cut a new 3.5-inch inspection hole on the bottom of our tank skin. This will give us access to our fuel fittings in that location. We want to cut our hole, the center of our hole needs to be exactly 12 inches off the back side of the trailing spar and 9.5 inches off the root rib. This will be my centering hole for my fly hole cutter. After removing the tank mount brackets on the outboard compression tube, it can be reinstalled using the original hardware. The first thing we're going to be doing with our new 13-gallon tank is locating all of the withdrawal fittings on the tank. On each tank there will be 5 withdrawal fittings installed. Keep in mind which tank you're working with, whether it's the right or left. There will be 2 extra fittings that are installed on the root side of the tank. This is our right tank for our right wing. Our extra fittings will be installed here and here. Our first fitting that we're going to install is for the forward fuel pickup. It's going to be located an inch off this forward edge and an inch off this bottom edge. That will be drilled to a 1/2 inch. Our next fitting will be located up in here in this recess, dead center on this circle here. It will be drilled a 1/2 inch. Our next location will be 5/8 off the bottom edge here and 5/8 off this edge here. That will be drilled to a 1/2 inch. Our next location will be on this area, a 1/2 inch hole dead center right here. And our final hole will be another 1/2 inch hole drilled dead center in this recess. All your withdrawal fittings have to be installed from the inside of the tank. Before you install your withdrawal fittings, make sure you have an O-ring on each of them. The next thing I do is I make myself with a piece of safety wire or whatever wire you might have about your shop and an 1/8 inch pipe to barb fitting, just safety wired onto this fishing tape basically. I'll fish this through the hole that I plan on putting my withdrawal fitting in and fish it out the filler neck hole, like so. After that, we'll load the withdrawal fitting onto my other fitting and pull it back through, like so. Now after this, we can remove our fishing tape, or we can load our other parts for the outside of the fitting onto the fishing tape so that we can hold our fitting secure without dropping it back into the tank. The first thing we want to put on is our rubber washer. Next thing that we put on is a steel washer. And then after that is a blue anodized AN nut. And before putting this nut on, you definitely want to lock tight the nut itself. And try to get Loctite only on the threads of the nut. So after we've Loctited our nut, the next thing we need to do is remove our fishing tape. Now these withdrawal fittings are kind of handy. They have actually a hex-shaped hole on the inside which allows you to insert an Allen wrench and prevent rotation of the withdrawal fitting while you're trying to tighten the blue anodized nut. The only problem here is because the fitting is in a recessed area, there's no way to get a wrench on this nut. So what I do is I use a deep 3/4 inch socket and I insert my Allen wrench through it, lock my inner fitting, and then I use my socket to turn the nut. And I want to turn just the nut, not the inner fitting, because I don't want to roll that O-ring. I'll use a pair of vice grips with maybe some tape on it, and I'll get on here and tighten this guy down until I see the rubber washer start to flare out. Now, as you can see, I've installed all of my fittings here, 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 and here. Now, the only oddball fitting is going to be the forward withdrawal fitting. Now, it is actually the same withdrawal fitting we were using in the other locations, only it has a tube welded to it. When they weld this tube to it, it takes away the advantage of having our Allen wrench hole in here. So what we'll have to do before we install this forward pickup line is, with the Dremel tool, cut a nice flat screwdriver slot in the end of this fitting so that we can use a makeshift screwdriver or what have you to hold anti-rotation on this while we tighten our blue anodized nut. If not, we'll rotate this fitting up and out of the bottom of the fuel pickup when we go to tighten our nut. Now that I've used my Dremel to cut slots in the end of my fitting about 1/8 of an inch deep, I want to remove the burrs from those cuts on the inside of this fitting using an 1/8 inch pipe tap. If we don't remove those burrs, it'll cause us a problem when installing our next fitting. What it will do is the burr inside will shear off the fuel resistant Teflon tape as we install this fitting and will cause a leak. So after that's done, you'll continue installing this fitting just like the other fittings. Now I've installed my forward pickup fitting. Next I'm going to use my handy dandy little homemade wrench here and my 3/4 inch wrench to tighten the fitting down. You want to be sure to visually verify through this top hole that that pickup line comes down and forward and is laying across the bottom of the tank. So as you tighten this fitting, a few times you might need to check to make sure that thing's staying where it needs to be. Okay, we've installed all of our withdrawal fittings. Our next step is to use some fuel resistant Teflon tape, and you can pick this up at your local plumbing store, Ace Hardware. It is a petroleum products sealant, and it works very good, and it's a lot cleaner and handier than your pipe dope, basically. It's just less messy. For our forward fitting, which is our fuel pickup line, we're going to be installing just an 1/8 to 1/4 inch barb fitting. And that I'll just temporarily install. Just temporarily install all the fittings, and then we'll go back and tighten. Here at the top of the tank, this is going to be a fitting for our crossover vent to the other tank, and it's going to be the top of our sight gauge. So to make this fitting setup, we're going to be installing an 1/8 to 1/8 coupler, male coupler, and then onto that we're going to be installing an 1/8 to 1/8 pipe thread female coupler. And when you do tighten these fittings, it's very important to back up the nut or the fitting behind it with another wrench. From there, on this particular fitting, we will be installing a T-fitting for our crossover vent and sightline gauge, but that will be after the closeout's installed. Here at the aft part of the tank, we have a 90-degree angle fitting, 1/8 inch pipe to 1/4 inch flare. It will be installed and orientated to the front of the tank. This will be the line for the bottom of our sight gauge. It will also get a fuel line fitting and your 1/4 inch line installed. At the very rear and lowest point of the tank, we'll have our main fuel pickup, and there we're going to install an 1/8 inch pipe thread, 3/8 inch flare fitting, and on there we'll install our 3/8 fuel line fitting. On the outboard side of our tank, we'll be installing this 1/8 inch brass fitting. This will be a fitting that we install for our vent line adapter that will be installed later. This vent line adapter will pick up our 90-degree elbow that we loosened up and removed while the tank was installed. Okay, before we temporarily install our tank for the first time, we need to create a little bit more room in our tank bay area. We have this third stiffener here, which is an extension flange of our top skin. What we need to do with it is we need to take a pair of modified vice grip, duckbill pliers, what have you, and we need to bend that flange back about 15 degrees. After we get it bent back all the way across, we're going to use some super glue and simply glue on our piece of X1011 edge wrap. This will help protect the tank against this flange. Now that we've installed our X1011 to our flange here, we're ready to install our 13-gallon tank temporarily for the first time. Before we do that, we'll want to take our new compression tube and pin it in place at the front spar with the original hardware. We'll swing the compression tube forward, grab our tank. We'll install the forward end of our tank first, and then swing the aft end into position. You'll have to spread the ribs open just a little bit, and the aft end will swing right in. You want to make sure that you push the tank outboard as far as possible and forward as far as possible, but not contacting the main spar. From there, we'll need to take a rat tail file and make a notch on the aft side of this tube here, as I've done. This notch will allow us clearance of the protruding inboard flap hinge bolt. We'll swing it into position, and just like the front, we'll use the original hardware and pin it in place. Okay, with our compression tube pinned at the forward and aft spar, we'll use our original tank mount brackets from the outboard compression tube. We'll use the original hardware and mount those tank mount brackets back to the inboard side of our tank. We'll secure these bolts, center up the brackets, and we'll come back and we'll transfer drill through our brackets into our compression tube and pop rivet CCPQ 44. We've pop riveted on our tank mount brackets, and now our tank is secure inside our wing structure. The next step that we're going to be working on is locating our new fuel filler cap. You'll see right off that the pre-drilled 3/4 hole in the center of our tank here, where our new fuel cap is going to go, is not in the same location as your original filler neck. That's okay, we've planned for this. What you're going to do is you're going to take your Viton rubber ring and you're going to center it over that 3/4 inch hole. Once you get it centered, you're going to mark the locations of all the holes, the outside of the ring and the inside of the ring on the tank. And what I like to do is I like to line up these 4 rivet holes here so that when my final bolts are installed in my cap, they're in line with the wing. Now that we've used our Viton ring to locate all of our rivet locations, our bolt locations, outside edge and inside edge, we'll remove the Viton ring, and you can see the offset in the old filler neck location and our new fuel cap location. This will all be corrected in a later step. From here, we'll proceed to removing the tank. Now with our tank removed, we'll continue with the modification of our top tank skin. What we're going to do first is we're going to use our Viton reinforcement ring, this aluminum ring, as a template again. We'll line it up with the holes that we previously marked around the perimeter of our largest circle. I'm going to drill through one. Cleco it in place. Line it up with the mark across from the hole I just drilled. Now after I drill all those holes, the next thing I'll do is mark a line on the inside perimeter of this ring. In a later step, we'll be trimming on this line that I've just drawn. Okay, we've transfer drilled all our holes using this ring, and we've marked the inside circumference of this ring onto our tank skin. We're going to remove the ring, and using a Dremel and cutoff wheel, and of course safety glasses, we're going to cut on this inside line and remove all this extra material. Now we've trimmed on our line and removed our excess material. The next thing we want to come back and do is clean up this jagged edge with a piece of 180 grit sandpaper. After that, we'll vacuum out the inside of the tank cell area. The next thing we'll be doing is installing our skin stiffeners, and they will be finally located centered in between the inboard and outboard tank bay ribs on the inside of the tank bay area here. We'll be installing 4 of them, one here, 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 and here. And to locate our holes in our tank bay skin, we'll use our stiffeners as templates. We'll come to the bottom side of the wing. For the tape measure, we'll measure from the bottom center of the main spar, we'll measure back 7 1/4 inches. We'll make a mark there. From that mark, we'll measure back 8 1/2 inches. We'll make a mark. From that mark, we'll again measure 8 1/2 inches. And then for our 4th stiffener, we'll measure 8 1/2 inches again. We'll make those marks on this inboard rib, and we'll also make those marks on our outboard tank bay rib. Next, we'll take our stiffener. As you see, I've already done these. I'll demonstrate this last one. We'll use our stiffener as a template. We'll get it located, centered in between our inboard and outboard tank bay ribs. We'll line it up with the marks that we've just made. We'll use our number 30 drill bit, and we'll transfer drill 1 hole. There, we'll reinstall our Cleco. We'll square our stiffener up. We'll come to the other end of our stiffener. Drill that hole. Cleco it in place. Now that we've got all of our stiffeners temporarily located, we'll come back and we'll finish drilling all of our holes. And when we reinstall these on the top side of the skin, our flat flange with our rivet holes will be facing aft. And you'll be installing AVEX rivets from the bottom side of the tank into our skin stiffeners. Okay, now that we have our skin stiffeners installed with our AVEX rivets, we can move on to patching or getting set up to patch our holes that we cut open in the bottom of our tank for access to our compression tube mount bolts. In the kit, you will be provided a sheet of 12 discs. You'll cut these apart with the tin snips, clean them up into a nice round shape. Now these discs already have 3 holes drilled in them. Now while we still have the tank out, it's a good time to put these discs in place and transfer drill those holes because we don't have to worry about drilling into the tank. So what you'll do is you'll place this disc centered on that hole, use a Sharpie or what have you to mark where those holes are going to be, remove the disc, make sure that you have proper edge distance on the sheet metal for your rivets to grab. If not, readjust. And then you'll transfer drill using the disc again. You'll transfer drill those 3 holes into the tank base skin. Now you want to be sure that when you're drilling these holes that you're going into only the sheet metal on the bottom of the tank bay area. We don't want to be going into any of the ribs, so you can orientate this disc however you need. Later in the video, we'll be moving some fittings around. It'll be the lower sight gauge fitting and the forward pickup fitting. We'll be moving those around and we'll have to drill new holes in our closeout. Those old holes can be covered using these same discs. Another hole that we'll be needing to patch is the old flush valve location. Our new tanks no longer have a flush valve. The pickup is low enough that anything that sets in the tank will be sumped out easily enough from the flush valve on the bottom of the airplane. So in your kit you'll be provided another disc, a larger disc, and with pre-drilled holes. You should already have holes located in your tank skin in this area, and when you're ready to install this final, you'll want to have it painted, and you'll just cleco it in place. And you'll pop 5 AVEX rivets and be done. We've got our fuel tank back up here on the table. We're going to proceed to finishing our fuel cap area. The first thing that we're going to do, and I've already done it, is click punch the locations that we previously marked with our Sharpie for our bolt locations that will fasten our fuel cap down. After we click punch them, we'll take a small drill bit. I've got a number 40 here, and we'll drill those holes on through. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to cut our main hole open for our fuel cap. To do this, we're going to use again a fly hole cutter, which we used previously on our tank bay area to cut our inspection plate. We're going to set this up for 2.5 inches, so it cuts a diameter of 2.5 inches. I've set it up for 1.25 inches dimension this direction. Because my fly hole cutter has a 1/4 inch piloting bit, this 3/4 hole that's already in the tank doesn't really do me much good. So what I have to do is take a piece of sheet metal, wood, what have you, drill a 1/4 inch hole in it, drill a couple smaller holes in it, again number 40, and we're going to center our 1/4 hole over the top of our fuel cap area. We'll then drill through our 1/4 inch holes. And we'll use some small screws to fasten that guy in place. This will then give us our 1/4 inch hole back. fly hole cutting our tank open. After that, we've used a razor knife to come back around the top edge and just kind of slightly deburr it, the same as on the inside edge. Knock that extra plastic off there so we get a nice good seal with our Viton scupper ring. Next thing we'll move on to is modifying or drilling our holes in our fuel cap ring. We'll use our retaining ring as a template to do this. Using a Sharpie, I'll just center that retaining ring up on the fuel cap ring. Make my marks. Come back with a click punch. A number 40 drill bit. From there, we'll upsize one of the holes to 3/16, which is going to be our final hole size. After we've upsized one hole, we'll take a 3/16 Cleco. Those guys together so they're not moving around. And we'll continue to use our retainer ring as a template and transfer drill our other holes. Okay, we've transfer drilled all the holes in our fuel cap ring. And now we need to use our fuel cap ring as a template to transfer our 3/16 holes into our tank. So we'll locate it here in place. I'll center it up. My 3/16 drill bit. I'm going to drill one of those holes. 3/16 Cleco. Holds that ring in place for us. No, it's not going to move. I'll continue to drill my other holes. From there, your fuel cap ring can now be sanded, and what we've been doing is just Scotch-Briting them because our cap needs to create a seal here. This is probably a bad area for paint, so we've come up with the idea that polishing them with a Scotch-Brite pad is going to look the best and be the most functional. So after we've done that, the next thing you'll need to do is now go take your tank to a garden hose and wash the inside out and get all our shavings and all of our particles out of the tank. Okay, we've washed our tank out and we've allowed it to dry. The next thing we need to do is glue our capture ring to our Viton scupper ring. To do this, we'll use some 3M spray adhesive. We'll just lightly coat the capture ring and then lightly coat just the edges of our Viton ring where that capture ring is going to set. Allow that a couple of seconds to air dry. letting it dry is crucial to it sticking well. Alright, so once we have that, we can set our Viton ring over our fuel cap area, like so. We'll move on to installing our fuel cap ring. Before we place this on, we'll have our retainer ring that has to be installed inside. Careful hands. Follow this ring over the top of it. Take our pan head screws, and a Phillips screwdriver, and we'll screw that screw in. And it be such a tight fit that the screws will actually screw in and hold all your rings together without actually having to install our steel nuts. We'll do that. We'll install our screws. Just prior to installing the screws finally, we'll add some fuel resistant silicone around the threads of the screw, and that will help prevent any. Okay, now that we have our screws installed with our silicone, next is the little bit tricky part. You'll definitely want to have a magnet on hand to retrieve the nuts as you drop them into the tank. Easiest way I've found is to just set the nut between two fingers, reach around the lip here, and then just kind of play around with them until you can get them started on. Like so. You'll do all your screws, install all your nuts to all your screws, and then you'll come back with a 3/8 wrench, and again get it installed on the nut, come back with the screwdriver, and continue to tighten all of your screws. Wipe off the excess silicone with a little bit of alcohol in there. Now that we have our fuel cap ring secured with our screws, nuts, and fuel resistant silicone, we can move on to our outboard vent tube adapter. Basically, you're going to install it on the outboard side of your tank where you'll have your brass fitting. On this brass fitting, there'll be a nut. Before we install the tube, we want to make sure the nut is basically hand tightened to its natural stopping point there. Then we'll insert the tube. And while we're tightening this nut, again, we'll back up the fitting behind it, but we'll also apply pressure to hold the tube in there while we're tightening it. And also when we tighten it, we want to hold it in about the position of, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches away from this rear insert nut. Keep in mind that this line is very flexible, so when we have it in the wing and we need to move it around a little bit to pick up our 90-degree fitting that's still installed in the wing, it will be relatively simple to do that. So now that we have our vent line adapter tube installed, we'll move on to pressurizing our tank prior to our final install. The first step to pressurizing your tank is getting your fuel cap set up so that it seals properly and yet doesn't seal so difficultly that you're not going to be able to open it easily. So with a 9/16 wrench, you can back off this nut and then turn this lower portion of this fuel cap, and you can adjust how tightly this fuel cap will actually seal. So right now I've got it set up the way I want. The rest of my fittings I've capped off using just some fuel line. My vent line I basically just capped with some 1/4 inch line, a 1/4 inch bolt, and installed some hose clamps. For my other fittings, I've gone ahead and installed the fuel line that will be permanently installed. At my rear main fuel pickup, I've cut my 3/8 fuel line to 32.5 inches, installed the hose clamp, and installed a 3/8 bolt and another hose clamp here at the end to seal it up. I did the same thing here with my lower sight gauge line. Cut my line to 19 inches, installed the hose clamp at this end, and a 1/4 inch bolt with a hose clamp at this end. My forward fuel pickup, I've cut my line to 12.5 inches and installed hose clamps, 1/4 inch bolt, and a hose clamp. Now keep in mind these lines will eventually get cut shorter yet, so this is all just temporary now for our pressurization test. I'm going to use my top sight gauge as my inlet for my air. I'm just going to use the air compressor and just a regular air nozzle to just kind of inflate my tank just a little bit. What I want to see is that the tank swells. I don't want to put too much air into this tank because you can split the seams by over pressurizing it. So we're looking for about 1 to 2 pounds. Basically I look for this thing to just start swelling. That's about all it takes. It's swollen. I'll just cap it with my thumb, and then I'll go around all my fittings with some soapy water and then just give them a good spray and start looking for bubbles. If I see bubbles, I've got a leak, I'll have to take that fitting apart and reinstall it. Okay, we pressure checked our tank and we're ready to install it for the final time. We'll do it just like we did before. We'll install the forward end of our tank first. We'll have to spread the ribs here to make room for our new fuel cap. Just the aft end, we'll have to spread the ribs a little bit here. Push it outboard as far as possible and forward as far as possible, staying off the main spar. We'll swing our compression tube into place over our fuel lines and under our flap teleflex. We'll secure the compression tube with the original hardware. We'll install it final, forward and aft. We'll get this thing relined up with our tank mount brackets, and we'll install our 3/16 bolts with washers and Loctite. Next, with a 1/2 inch wrench, we'll finish installing our vent system. We'll secure our vent line adapter tube to the rest of our outboard vent line system at the 90-degree angle fitting. Now that we've secured our outboard vent line, we can reinstall our rib channels. Before we reinstall our rib channel, I've removed the rivet head that was captured between our channel and our fabric and paint. What I'm going to do is just pop my rivet right on the outside of all that, and it'll look cleanest that way. Secure it in place with Clecos. And I'll pop rivet it with AAPQ 41s. Okay, now that we have our rib channels installed, we'll move on to finishing out our fuel cap area. To do this, we'll grab our cover ring that at this time should be painted the color of your wings. In this case, ours should be white. We're using this for representation only. To install this, you'll first cleco it on. And when you cleco it on, you'll want to be very careful to ensure that you've gone through your Viton ring and also through the aluminum backing plate behind the Viton ring. What I do is I can visually inspect between this rib and the top of the tank. There's just enough daylight for me to see in there. What I'll do from there is I'll work my way around the ring every other hole, putting a cleco, and also verifying that it's secured properly. And from this point, what I'll do to true this ring back up with the holes that I've drilled, I'll re-drill through these holes that I've left open. If I don't do this, my holes aren't lined up perfectly because I didn't use this ring to transfer drill into this tank skin. If I pop those rivets and those holes are off, it will distort my ring and I'll just not get an as pretty end result. So what I'll do is I'll take my drill, and I need to be careful not to drill into the tank. So what I'll do is I'll make a drill stop. Real simple. You can take a piece of masking tape, probably go about maybe 3/16 drill bit exposed, and just wrap a good length of masking tape up on your bit. This works great for a drill stop. Now I'll come back in and just clean those holes up just a little bit. And then I would proceed to pop AVEX rivets in those open holes. After popping the rivets, I'd remove my clecos, pick my drill up again, and then clean those holes up where my clecos are now, and then final pop those rivets. And then the top of the tank is really finished at that point. Now that we've completed our filler cap area, we'll move on to completing our wing closeout area. The first thing we want to do is take the forward portion of our wing closeout, locate it up here to try to figure out where we need to relocate holes for our new fittings. These new fittings have moved. This fitting has moved aft. This fitting has moved up. So we'll just set our closeout up here, get it lined up, and we'll come on the back side and we can just locate right there with a Sharpie. Here we can eyeball through and take a pretty good shot at it. We're going to be drilling a pretty good hole. We're going to be using a grommet, so we've got some room for error there. So we'll go ahead and upsize these to their final hole size, and then we'll come back and work more on finishing up the bottom of our sight gauge. Okay, now we've located our holes for the new locations for our fittings for our forward pickup and our top sight gauge. The next thing we need to do is terminate our fuel line at the appropriate place. To do this, we're going to assemble our lower sight gauge fittings. These fittings consist of a 1/4 barb to 1/8 pipe thread into a 1/8 to 1/8 90-degree coupler. From there we have an 1/8 pipe thread to 1/4 inch barb 90. We've assembled this to simulate where we need to terminate this line. We can hold this 90-degree fitting kind of centered in our pre-existing lower sight gauge hole, and it will give us an idea of where to cut this line. And I can see right here with my finger, this is where we need to cut it. I've installed my pre-assembled fittings with thread sealant, and I'm hose clamped it to the end of my 1/4 inch line. The next thing I'll do is I'll come back here and I'll secure that 1/4 inch line to the compression tube with a zip tie. Then I'll install the grommet in my lower sight gauge area. I'll feed my fittings through. Now I've made sure when I assembled these fittings that I kept this 90-degree fitting pointing directly straight back at my upper sight gauge fitting. Now I can install my upper sight gauge T fitting. It would be an 1/8 pipe thread with 2 flip fitting ends. The 1/8 pipe thread is what we're going to be screwing into our fitting. Now we're leaving our root closeout loose because we still need to come up behind here with a wrench to hold that fitting just behind this T when we tighten this T. When we tighten it, we'll want to end with our T pointing directly at our other lower sight gauge. From there, we'll install our sight gauge to our lower fitting with the hose clamp. On our upper fitting, we'll install a 1/4 inch fuel line fitting. And terminate our sight gauge at our fuel line fitting with another hose clamp. So we finally installed our sight gauge line and fittings. We've gone ahead and reinstalled our 1/4 inch fuel line on our front withdrawal fitting, and we've clecoed the closeout now in place. Now your closeout will probably be painted. In a couple more steps, you'll be able to go ahead and pop rivet your entire closeout on. The next thing we want to do is insert our middle closeout piece under our forward closeout. Cleco it in place. And for our last inspection plate cover, we'll install some serrated edge wrap to our Teleflex slotted hole. And we'll install a large grommet for our 3/8 fuel line. Now, depending on which wing you're working on and or which wing you have your pitot and static set up, in this case, this is our right wing. Our pitot and static is set up in our left wing, so we won't be using these holes for anything. If this were your pitot and static side, you would route your pitot and static through these 2 holes using some smaller grommets that we've provided for you in the kit. So once you get these grommets put on, you can slide your fuel line, Teleflex, and possibly your static lines through these holes, slide this up into place, and fasten it with the screws. Okay, now that we've installed our closeout inspection plate, we can go ahead and now rivet on finally our entire closeout, all with AVEX rivets provided in the kit. To install our sight gauge decal, we'll simply remove the upper sight gauge fitting and apply the decal centered between the 2 grommets at the upper and lower sight gauge fitting, like so. Afterward, reinstall our sight gauge, get it good and snugged up, and then we can move on to finally installing our patches on the belly of our tank over the compression tube attachment bolt access holes. After we've installed these and our inspection plate covers, we can reinstall the wings and take her for a spin. So here we have our S7 all topped off with 26 gallons of fuel. I hope this instructional video has been very helpful and informative, and from all of us here at Rands, we wish you smooth skies and many safe journeys ahead. Clear prop!